I was kind of wondering how long it would be before I could say this again, if I'd ever say it again. But OnePlus is kind of back. So this is the new OnePlus 11. Now, people who have been following the industry for a little bit already know the story behind this phone, which is OnePlus starting out hot as a fan favorite with A+ bang for the buck, flagship killer type of phones, peaking, I'd say, around the OnePlus 7 Pro, which is my phone of the year, and then slowly descending into the very generic, expensive flagship that they swore to kill. Their last attempt at a phone, the 10T, is literally the worst phone that came out last year. It won my bust of the year, and they got a trophy for it. And apparently they've used this as motivation. They keep saying, oh, now they want to redeem themselves. Now they're going to turn it around and, great. Like, I think we all know the next phone was already in the works by the time they got that trophy, but if you want to give me some credit, I'll take some credit. Sure. But the point is, they're sort of reflecting shades of old OnePlus, which is a really good thing, because this phone is really good. So this is a flagship smartphone right now for $699. In a world where the Galaxy S23 just came out, it's $799. That's a sort of a de facto default for a lot of people. My semi-hot take is this could be a better phone for a lot of people. Now, it's not perfect, and they still do some classic corner-cutting things to pull this off, and there are still some software behaviors that I really do not like, but here are the basics. So if you want just a classic spec sheet bang for the buck summary, this phone has a Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 with 8 gigs of RAM, a 6.7-inch 1440p 120Hz OLED display, triple cameras, and a 5,000 milliamp hour battery with 80-watt charging for $699. That's pretty damn good. So I think because the phone has like the nice screen, the big battery, and the newest chip, it begs comparisons to like the $900,000 other flagship phones. But like I said, it does cut some corners. The big one being no wireless charging, huge. And then the other, it's IP64 rated instead of IP67, so it'll survive a mist better than a splash. But on the design front, I'd call this a mixed bag. Mixed bag, It definitely is taking a step away from the ultra generic last generation. The Hasselblad branding is back, and we'll talk about the cameras in a minute. But also, the alert slider is back. Literally an iconic OnePlus feature that they somehow thought getting rid of last time was a good idea. This one also has a very slightly textured matte black finish on the back. Not quite sandstone level, but enough to be interesting, so I like it. And the camera bump is kind of a weird hybrid of smoothly wrapping around the side like Samsung used to, but then turning it into a big circle plateau that looks like a generic, not seamless thing anymore at all. It's whatever. I don't mind it. It's fine. But you're not here for the back of the phone, though. Like, honestly, if you just saw the back and saw the lack of wireless charging and the slightly awkward camera bump, it feels like a $699 phone, sure. But the front is where it gets way more impressive. 6.7-inch corner to corner, thin bezels with a slight curve over the edges. I wish it was flatter, but it's not too bad. 1440p resolution, 120Hz LTPO, OLED, 1000 Hz touch sample rate, and 1300 nits peak brightness that's visible outdoors in all but direct sunlight, and that little corner cutout for the selfie camera. That's nearly as good as you can ask for these days. And actually using a phone, it's very snappy and smooth. It's got the fingerprint reader under the display in just the right spot. It's fast, and OnePlus went a little over the top with like the future-proofing of the highest end, fastest internals. It's good details. Like, this phone has not just Wi-Fi 6 or Wi-Fi 6E, but the brand new Wi-Fi 7. Not just UFS 3, but UFS 4.0, the fastest storage. And not just LPDDR5, but LPDDR5X, the fastest memory available. So this is legitimately very snappy, and it's a quick phone, brand new. But then because of those high-end internals, I do expect the headroom to age pretty well. The Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 has proven to be a pretty good chip. Like, the other phones that have had it so far have been really good phones, and this is too. It's a powerful chip, and the GPU is great, but also it's been pretty efficient. And that's affecting the battery situation. And I think for battery on this phone, this is where it feels the most like old OnePlus. So the OnePlus 11 has a 5,000 milliamp hour battery. Great battery life. So if I use it like normal, maxed out, high brightness, 1440p and 120 Hz on, I'm making it to the end of the day fine, no problem. When I go 1080p and still 120 Hz, I was able to get 2 days out of this phone. Matter of fact, I'm on the second day right now. It's almost noon. I have 31%. That's pretty good. I'm getting to the end of 2 light days with like 7-8 hours of screen on time. Fine. That's really good. And then for charging, in the US, this one has 80-watt charging. I think in China, other versions have 100-watt charging, and there's a difference in electrical standards, but super fast charging. So if I ever found myself thinking, oh, I need a little extra battery, it's kind of low right now, it was rare, but I could plug in for a few minutes and have more than enough. It is that Oppo SuperVOOC charging tech, so it's still the brick with USB-A instead of USB-C. But hey, at least it comes in the box, plus the cable. So I know also having wireless charging would be really convenient, and it's kind of annoying going from a phone that does have wireless charging to one that doesn't. But I think OnePlus is counting on people who have other phones now that don't have wireless charging, moving to this one and finding it's like an awesome battery experience. So that's what they're counting on. But let me talk about the cameras in this phone, because these are also a throwback to old OnePlus, which, if you remember those phones, means not as good as the flagships, but really solid. So it's got that 50 megapixel main camera that bends down to 12.5 megapixels, and it gives me images that are generally pretty sharp and nice if you don't zoom in. I mean, I was pleasantly surprised that in most different types of shooting scenarios, it was at least capable of giving me a solid shot, even in low light. When it does miss, it tends to overexpose a bit, and even more so with darker skin tones. Also, focus is a little suspiciously slow sometimes, so I found myself taking multiple shots of moving objects just to make sure I got a good one. But you know what? If the bar is being set at just a good enough camera that it's not a dead giveaway that it's a cheaper phone, it clears that bar for sure. I couldn't tell you how much that Hasselblad partnership is actually doing for photos here. I mean, color science maybe, it seems like there's pretty balanced colors and nice optical characteristics, but like that's about all I can say about that. I mean, the photos look fine. The ultra wide is definitely soft near the edges of the frame, but at least it matches colors pretty well with the main. And it does do macro when you get super up close to things, but it's not good macro. I mean, it does the macro, but yeah, not great. The only reason I'm not going to keep dailying this phone, though, aside from other phones that I have to test very soon, is the software. There's just some things that I mean, the software is fine. Lots of people use this software all over the world. I have no problem with it. But there's so many little quirks and things that they just add up and they get annoying. So here, if you're going to be like old OnePlus, let's have some feedback. Let's listen to some user feedback here. So I'm an Android user who spends a lot of time in the notifications. It's a very important part of the phone. A lot of other people spend a lot of time there too. In every other Android phone that I've used, when you have a notification, you can swipe left or swipe right to clear them. But for some reason on this phone, you can only swipe away to the right. If you swipe to the left, no matter how fast your swipe is, it pulls up settings and then you have to swipe again to clear. So this is slightly annoying every single time. And then in every other Android phone, if I have multiple notifications from the same app, then I can swipe down with one or two fingers to view each one. And if I just want to open the app, you click it. Or if you want to open a specific instance of that notification, you can do that when it's expanded. On this phone, for some reason, you can't swipe to expand the group of notifications. You can only click it, which expands it. But then in the apps where there's a single notification and you want to expand it, like a camera preview or a message preview or something with more information, you can't just swipe like every other Android phone. You have to tap this tiny bar at the top of the notification around that arrow to view the preview. That is even more annoying over time. And then in every other Android phone, if you pull down your notifications and you have a lot of them, you can always go, you know what, never mind, and then pull them all the way back up to close. On this phone, it takes multiple swipes to get through all your notifications and close them every time. That's a little more annoying. And then if you have music playing in the background, say on Spotify or a podcast or something, you want to get to that app, on every other phone, it's a swipe and a tap away. On this phone, it's a swipe, a tap, and another tap to get to the app. There's a bunch of little things like that from coming from almost any other Android phone that doesn't use Color OS or this version of software. And it would be fine if that's the default behavior, but there's at least a toggle to let me not have that happen every time, but it happens every time. But the good thing is, other than that, there's a lot of nice things like in this software. It's very well thought out and laid out, I think, especially with the haptics and the combination of visual and haptic touches throughout it, like pulling up and down the brightness slider, you get this nice haptic feedback, or going up and down in volume, it's the same thing. It's very well thought out in that way. So I think if OnePlus really wants to sort of redeem themselves and they look back a little bit at what was so successful with Oxygen OS, I know they eventually did this merge thing with Oppo and Color OS, but look at what people loved about Oxygen OS and really think about bringing some of those things back. Okay, so this phone's competition, At $699, it's kind of interesting. I think today you'd probably consider buying a Pixel 7 for $599. But what this phone will have over some of these other phones in its price range is some of the highest end specs. The Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 and the 1440p display specifically. It'll always have some of those spec things if you're interested in that. There's even a $799 version that has 16 gigs of RAM and 256 gigs of storage too. So yeah, that's what feels like sort of classic redemption OnePlus. Is this a full redemption? No, I'm not going to give them full redemption status yet. But if the character arc of OnePlus was kind of like this and then like this, it does feel like this is an inflection point. It feels like this is a little bit of a shift in the right direction, at least. So now I just hope they keep it going.
Hey guys, I'm Tom the Tech Chap, and this is the new OnePlus 11. And this has to be good. Seriously, OnePlus needs to win us back after years of incremental upgrades, confusing lineups, price rises, and just a lack of support. They've lost their edge, what made them special. So, OnePlus sent over this big red box with both the OnePlus 11 review sample and also these new OnePlus Buds Pro 2 in this very fancy arbor green color, and these will cost you around £179. And these are one of the first true wireless studio earbuds to actually adopt Google's signature spatial audio feature, which was developed for Android 13. Very nice. But really, I'm here for this guy. Can this put them back on track? Well, the answer is yes. I'm happy to report the OnePlus 11 is actually a terrific phone. Flagship specs with the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2, faster RAM and storage, a much improved main camera, great battery life, they've doubled their Android support to 4 years, the alert slider is back, and it undercuts the big dogs, starting at $699 or £729, which makes it a whopping 120 quid less than the cheapest Galaxy S23, and the same for the Pixel 7 Pro, which is a big plus for the OnePlus. I will tell you now that this is not perfect. I do have a couple of issues, which I'll come to in a second. And also I need to spend more time with this and the new Galaxy S23 and the Pixel 7 Pro and some of the competition to see if this really is the best buy at this price point. So I'll make another video soon. But what I can tell you right now is this is definitely worth considering. Side by side with its two predecessors, the 10 Pro and the 10T, you can see it shares a pretty similar size and design. It definitely shares more of its DNA with the 10 Pro, as we see the return of the alert slider, the selfie hole punch is back in the corner, and we do have this curved screen, which I know not everyone is a fan of. I must admit, I did quite like the flat edges of the 10T. But the 11 is kind of like the 10 Pro and the 10T made sweet love together and created a child, because we have the sort of all-round higher specs, the nicer screen, the better camera of the 10 Pro with the performance and also a little bit more of the affordability of the 10T. So really this is the sort of culmination of these two phones, but also with a new processor and a better camera. It comes in the usual black and green options, although I must admit I do think black would look better. This kind of darker glossy green looks a little bit plasticky. I kind of wish they'd gone back to a matte finish. But it's still a good looking phone, and as the cliche goes, it feels good in the hand. We get stereo speakers, although no headphone jack or micro SD card support, and we do get some water and dust resistance with an IP55 rating, but not quite as resistant as most rivals. Similarly, the front uses Gorilla Glass Victus, although not the latest Victus Plus, and on the back we have the slightly older Gorilla Glass 5. So there are some cost-cutting measures there, but it's not really a big deal. What is a big deal though is this gets the new Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 chip, and that's also combined with faster LPDDR5X RAM and also UFS 4 storage. And the tech nerds among you are like, oh, that's pretty interesting. And everyone else is just like, okay, great. But it means the chip, the RAM, and the storage are all considerably faster than before. And even before I throw a benchmark at this, I can tell you it feels incredibly fast to use, although Oxygen OS 13 also has a part to play in that. So just how fast is this new OnePlus 11? Well, let's put it to the test, and in my 20-minute 3D Mark Wildlife Extreme stress test, it's 38% faster than the 8 Gen 1 in the 10 Pro, and 30% faster than the 8 Plus Gen 1 in the 10T. Now the stability score is lower, so it's throttling more, although really only at the end of the test, but the scores are consistently higher, and we're looking at a bump from 22 to 27 frames per second. And it's more efficient. The same test used 7% of the battery on the 10 Pro, 4% on the 10T, and 3% on the 11. So that's all well and good, but one issue I have had with OnePlus phones in the past, and it's not exclusive to OnePlus, but I have experienced this, is a gradual slowdown in performance, especially after like a couple of years, but hopefully not anymore because they've actually certified this with TÜV SÜD and their 48-month performance test, and it got an A rating, whatever that means. I assume it's good. Now, I haven't actually heard of TÜV SÜD before. I presume it's the South version of TÜV Rheinland, but generally they are a very reputable certification company. And the idea is a bit like we had with the durability test with folding phones, but with this, they'll really intensely use the hardware and see if there's any performance degradation over time. Now, obviously, I'm not going to know the results for the next 2, 3, 4 years with regular use, but hopefully, fingers crossed, it does have an impact, and this does maintain its high performance for a much longer period than some of the previous OnePlus phones. The thing is, though, while the extra few FPS in demanding games is always welcome, a stable 60 in Apex and Genshin is definitely impressive, but it can be hard to notice that difference in everyday use. Versus the old 10 Pro, apps open maybe half a second quicker. It's just about noticeable, but only as I have them side by side, and there's really nothing in it versus the 10T. However, if you are a gamer, or you edit 4K videos, maybe in Premiere Rush on your phone, or just want the most future-proof tech, then it probably is worth it. But OnePlus phones are already incredibly slick and fast, and that is largely down to Oxygen OS. We're now on the 13th version, which sits on top of Android 13, and while we've been seeing the convergence of Oppo and OnePlus over the last couple of years, I mean, Warp Charge fully went out the window and now it's Super VOOC, and for a while we did think the OnePlus would get Color OS instead. I must admit, I am happy to see Oxygen OS is as fast as ever, and there's some really nice customization options. Everything from changing the font, to the icons, to the fingerprint reader animation, the always-on display, and also in supported apps, if you do a 3-finger swipe up from the bottom, it opens up split screen mode, which can come in handy, or if you just want to completely overwhelm your senses with all the content. And it's the little things too. The haptic motor has a really satisfying vibration to it. And I love the alert slider. Switching from ring to vibrate to silent without looking or while it's in your pocket is really useful. So yes, the jump in performance versus last year's phones isn't that significant outside of benchmarks or the most demanding games, but chances are you're upgrading from a phone that's 2 or 3 years old, and from that, this is going to be a real step up. I'm bringing these in again because I want to go back to talking about the battery, because all three have the same size 5,000 mAh cell, which is a really good sized battery. Now, after 5 hours of YouTube, with all phones set to Full HD Plus and about 50% brightness, the 10 Pro is down to 72%, the 10T is at 77%, and the 11 wins with 79% remaining. So I reckon I can bump the resolution up to Quad HD, or more realistically keep it on the auto switch mode, while getting a similar battery life to the 10T, which is limited to Full HD. And considering the 10T came 4th in my big battery rundown test, only losing out to the iPhone 14 Plus, the Origin Phone 6, and by just a couple of minutes the 12T Pro, I was already really impressed by the battery life. And the 11 improves on that further, so battery life is a real selling point here, and you'll comfortably get a day and a half of normal use. It's not all down to the new chip though, because this is actually using a brand new LTPO 3.0 screen. We've had LPTO for a couple of years now, and that basically means that it can dynamically adapt the refresh rate based on what's on the screen. If you're gaming at 120, you'll go to 120, but if you're just watching YouTube videos at 30, it'll go down to 30 to save battery life. But with this new 3.0 tech, it's basically just faster and even more efficient. And the always-on display only uses 1 Hz, so that also contributes towards preserving the battery life. Now in the box, along with the phone, obviously, and a SIM ejector tool, although no clear plastic case with this OnePlus for whatever reason, which is a bit of a shame. We do get a power adapter and also, of course, OnePlus's famous red cable, and this is a 100-watt Super VOOC charger. So you'll be able to top up your OnePlus 11 up to 75% in just 15 minutes or 25 minutes for a full charge. However, once again, this does not support wireless charging, and therefore, of course, any kind of reverse charging either, which is disappointing. On a phone this expensive in 2023, the lack of wireless charging is a shame. Going back to the screen though, because aside from the LTPO3 tech, the display hasn't really changed that much. It's still a great looking 6.7-inch Quad HD 120Hz AMOLED, same 1300 nit peak HDR brightness, which is pretty typical at this price point, but doesn't quite hit the 1800 or 2000 nits from the super duper flagship rivals. But what is new for this year is support for Dolby Vision HDR, on top of HDR10 Plus that we already get. And we should be seeing an update for the Netflix app adding support for Vision soon as well. Right, camera time. And I brought the 11 with me to Paris for a nice little long weekend with Mrs. Tech Chap, and on the whole, I've got to say, it's a lot better than I expected, although I do have a couple of issues. So the phone packs in a triple lens setup with a 50 megapixel main, a 48 megapixel ultra wide, which also doubles as a very impressive macro, and finally a 32 megapixel portrait telephoto lens. As they reckon, the main reason you'd use your zoom is for the better focal length for portraits, not for actually taking regular zoomed in photos. And I'm inclined to agree, actually. So switching to the portrait mode, you have 1x and 2x options, and in good light, portraits can look really nice. Although I do find sometimes, in or out of portrait mode, the OnePlus can lean towards a flatter, cooler look, especially with skin tones, which can sometimes look a little bit unnatural. Photography can of course be very subjective, and OnePlus have once again teamed up with Hasselblad, and while it continues to only be a software rather than hardware deal, their fancy natural color calibration is now utilized in all aspects of the camera, whereas previously it was just limited to the Pro mode, which was a bit useless for most of us. Now on the whole, I'm actually very impressed with the OnePlus 11's camera. Photos are rich in detail, we get impressive dynamic range, and also thanks to the new spectral sensor, the white balance is on point most of the time. In low light, a lot of phones can struggle with strong, often tungsten lighting and end up overcompensating and going too cool and too white, whereas I found the OnePlus does a really good job, even in tricky conditions. I was also kind of blown away by how good the macro is. By default, it'll switch to the macro, which uses the ultra-wide, when you get really close up to your subject. And these are some of the best close-up shots I've seen in a long time. One criticism I do have with the camera is the shutter speed still seems to be on the slower side compared to some rivals, particularly in lower light, so any movement can cause your subject to be a little bit blurry. Switching over to video, and I would say this is a noticeable step up in quality as well. Sadly, there aren't any new modes. It still tops out at 4K 60 or 8K 24. I'm surprised there isn't an 8K 30 here, but the 4K 30 video I shot with this came out really nicely, and the OIS and EIS combination does a great job smoothing everything out, even at night, which is much trickier. In fact, shooting video with the AI highlight mode turned on is particularly impressive. I love this shot of rainy Paris. I mean, it's not flawless, but for the money, and compared to most Android phones, I'm definitely taken aback by how good this looks. So altogether, great for photography, solid portrait shots, sharp and stable video, but it is let down by the selfie camera, which actually seems to be a downgrade even from last year's 10 Pro with a lower-end IMX471 sensor versus the 615 before, and also 16 megapixels down from 32. It also still lacks autofocus, and in terms of selfie video, it's okay, but I just can't get over the fact that we're still limited to 1080p Full HD on a 2023 flagship phone with a Snapdragon 8 Gen 2, all that power. I just don't understand OnePlus. Why is it still 1080p? So let's wrap this up. Is the OnePlus 11 actually worth buying? Well, short answer, yes. Long answer, also probably yes, although let's see what some of the other phones can do as well this year. For £729, I think the pricing is really competitive, although less so in Europe, which is about €849. That is a bit more expensive. But for $729, we get great specs, a really good main camera that takes some lovely portrait shots, terrific battery life, a smart design, Dolby Vision is a nice upgrade to the screen. Downsides, well, no wireless charging is a bit of a bummer. Also, the IP rating is a little bit average. I also don't love the look and feel of this. I would definitely go with the black one if I was going to buy it. And also, not everyone loves a curved screen. More importantly though, the selfie camera still leaves a lot to be desired, especially with video. And also, it would have been nice to have a proper telephoto camera. And in low light, I still think it struggles a little bit compared to some of the flagship competition. And even last year with the 10 Pro and the 10T, it was kind of confusing. Which one's better? Why am I compromising on some things? Why is that one cheaper? It was a mess. But the good news, at least in my opinion, is that I think this is putting them back on track. The OnePlus 11 is definitely worth considering. But actually, what really stands out to me is just that they're doubling down on support for these phones. Now that we have this 4-year guaranteed performance, and the doubling of their Android support from 2, which was pitiful, to 4 years. And that for me is a really big deal.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, and share. For more videos like this, I'm ICJ, and this is Amiable Media. Catch you in the next one.